Hello, class. It's Professor Streeter, and I enjoyed our conversation this week. I just wanted to follow up with a few remarks about the slides in the slideshow that I didn't really get to, and then remind you of some things about how to access the assignments on D2L. So I'm going to make myself small in the corner of the screen and begin by looking at the shell for our course on D2L. I've rearranged the announcements. Now you can see the first announcement is the reading and writing assignment for this week. And if it wasn't clear from class on Wednesday, you can access all of the discussion forums from one place. Here in the communication tab, you click here and then click discussions. And there's the class cafe. Some of you have posted there. The Monday feedback and a description of how that works. The first one is here. That's due this coming Monday. And then the Wednesday discussions and another description of how that works. And this is the first one for this week. And then there'll be a Wednesday discussion for next week that I'll post this weekend. That I'll make available this weekend so you can start thinking about it. Okay, that's the discussions. And then under the assessment tab here at the top, you have, first of all, grades. You can view your grades here. This is where you can access all the quizzes and all of the assignments. Now, again, as I said, you can find links to all of these things in the weekly content module, and I'll send you emails with links to these, and it's in the announcements, but this is where they all are gathered. So the links are taking you here. So if you click assignments, we've got the dates for the major assignments and the ones that have been opened up. And here's the first homework assignment, which is due next week, not this week. But this is a 250-word response to a prompt about Gilgamesh. And that's due on the 22nd. And again, to submit your homework, you click Add a File and then download the document from your computer. I'm just going to put a random file from my desktop and you download it, and there it is. And you can write comments and about your submission if you want me to, if there's something you want me to know. This is awesome. Okay, and you submit, and then that's there for me to read and assess and comment on. Okay, just a reminder for those of you who maybe missed class, or just to remind you. Okay, so let's just let's come back then to the slideshow, and this is where I paused in the middle to ask if you had any questions. So I'm going to present this slideshow now and talk a little bit about the slides in the second half. So that actually is an image of not Gilgamesh, but an image of Odysseus, the wanderer. He's trying to find his way home, which is one of the themes of this course, the theme of homecoming, what it means to come home, what it means to have a home, to find one's home. He is dressed as a beggar here. Odysseus is a king, the king of Ithaca, an island state in ancient Greece on the Mediterranean. He is, at this stage in the story, he is home, but nobody knows that he's home. He is not recognized as King Odysseus. He is dressed up and disguised as a beggar. And here he is asking, in the posture of a supplicant, he is asking for supplication. He is asking for help. He is begging. This is one of Odysseus's tests of the people on the island of Ithaca who have been living there for 20 years in his absence, and he wants to know what kind of men they are. And he tests them. He tests them all. And this is one of the ways that he tests them. How do they respond to the beggar, the strange beggar who arrives in their city unannounced? How do they treat him? This is a test of their character. How do they treat the strange beggar on the street. Okay, we'll return to the story of Odysseus later in the semester. But these are our starting points, and as I made clear, we're beginning with a reading of Gilgamesh, an older poem from Mesopotamia. And these are the questions that we're going to begin with. Where do we come from? What are we doing here? Where are we going? What do we really care about? Focusing on that where are we going question and where do we come from, this how do we relate our past to our present and our future, right? What is the relationship between how we read our past and how we envision our future, right? We're looking at very old stories, and these stories themselves are looking back, right? The poet of Gilgamesh is looking back at a distant past, which is now even more distant for us. So why do we read the past? How do we read the past? How does it relate to the way we envision our future? You can think of the past as something that we make use of as a culture. What is the good or what is the use of the stories that we tell about our past? We also use stories about our past to construct our identity. How do we do that? Why do we do that? Okay, so that's something to think about. Focusing on the idea of stories and the way they relate us to the past and to the future. And the question of identity, something that is constructed through storytelling. The last couple questions here: what unites us? What divides us? How are we supposed to live together? What does it mean to build and sustain a community over time? All of the stories we will read address this question, right? What does it mean to sustain and build a nation, right? A people. And we can think about that in our context, right? What unites and divides this country? In the Constitution, we have a reference. It opens with "we the people." Who is the we? How do we identify the we? Right? Is there one America? Are there many Americas? Right? Is there a sense of oneness within the diversity of cultures? And how is that related to the stories that we tell about our origins, our past? Okay, so that's one way of thinking about the starting points and the themes of the course. As I said, we're going to be looking at these three texts. These are very old stories, and all of these texts will give us a way of erasing these kinds of questions. We're also going to read a fourth book by a contemporary living writer named Madeline Miller, who is a scholar of ancient Greek mythology, and she kind of does a rewrite of parts of the Greek mythology from the point of view of Circe, a minor goddess who lives on an island. She kind of has her roots in the sea, and she develops witchy powers. But she encounters Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey. She is the heroine of Madeline Miller's book, Circe. So we'll look at a kind of contemporary retelling of Greek mythology as we read Homer's original telling of the story of Odysseus and his return home. That's the fourth book that we'll look at. So at the heart of all of these stories, including Circe, is this struggle, or a series of struggles to make sense of, to discover, to bind, to transcend. We can think about these together next week. But stories, the word mythos, right, is an ancient word, a Greek word, maybe even a pre-Greek word. We can translate it roughly as stories, but different forms of speech. Mythos kind of can be translated as anything that we do in speech. And the original stories were of course sung. They were songs sung by bards. They weren't written down. Writing came later. Anyway, at the heart of all of these ancient stories is a struggle to make sense of the world. We can call that cosmology, right? A struggle to understand the cosmos, a struggle to discover sources of meaning and value in our lives. That's a kind of ethical project. And a struggle to bind people together into communities. That's a sort of political function of storytelling, right? It serves a political purpose. And then the stories reveal a struggle to transcend our nature, to transcend human nature and awaken a sense of awe in the mystery of being, right? And this ties into art and religion and other forms of culture, right? We are finite mortal beings, but we strive to kind of transcend or go beyond the ordinariness of life. And these are stories that give us a way of doing that. I reference here Joseph Campbell, and he's someone who developed these ideas of the power and the function of myth. Here, let me pause. I might be running out of time. No, we still have time. Okay. In the next slide here, this is a picture of the cover of a book by Joseph Campbell, someone who studied ancient mythology from different parts of the world, sort of world mythology, and wrote a lot of books about the power of myth, and tried to define and understand what all of these myths had in common. He was a popular author, writer in the 60s in this country, and Bill Moyers, a television personality, kind of made him famous. And so this is one of the ways in this country, in America, that we think about the power of myth through the eyes of Joseph Campbell. If you're interested in reading anything by Campbell, you can still find it in libraries and bookstores. You can go online and watch videos of Bill Moyers interviewing Joseph Campbell. But on the other side of this slide, we have a definition of myth, right? The word myth, mythos, has been defined in many ways in scholarship. This is just one common one. I actually pulled this from Wikipedia. You'll see this quotation in many different contexts. It's often cited. I don't know much about Lauri Honko, but he's a Finnish folklorist. He studied folklore in Finland and other parts of the world, and he wrote a lot of articles and books about mythology. This comes from an article he wrote in 1984. You can see at the bottom here an example of how to refer to a source. We have the author, the year of publication, the title of the essay, and where it appeared. It appeared in this book edited by Alan Dundes called Sacred Narrative, Readings in the Theory of Myth, published by the University of California Press. And this comes from page 49 of that book. So here's an early example for you of how to cite. We'll talk about citing sources in your essays, but here's one example of how to do that. But here's his definition. There's a lot here. I want to start thinking about how we define myth, how we define mythos, this Greek idea of a kind of story, right? Myth, a story of the gods. This is Honko. A religious account of the beginning of the world, the creation, fundamental events, the exemplary deeds of the gods as a result of which the world, nature, and culture were created together with all parts thereof and given their order, which still obtains. A myth expresses and confirms society's religious values and norms. It provides a pattern of behavior to be imitated and testifies to the efficacy of ritual with its practical ends and establishes the sanctity of cult. There's a lot there to unpack. I'm not going to try to unpack it for you right now, but the argument that Honko would make is that all myths involve some elements of what he's describing here in this quotation, right? There are differences between different cultures and how their origin stories are told, but they all share some of these common elements. And they're all ways of, I want to focus on the second part, expressing and confirming a society's values and norms, providing a pattern of behavior to be imitated, and testifying to the efficacy or the usefulness or of ritual, the effects of ritual on culture, the ends, the practice of ritual. And right, in some sense, a myth forms the basis of something like a cult, right? Or a form of belief, a practice that involves a certain set of beliefs and values. Okay, it may not be that all myths share these features. Certainly not all myths are stories primarily of gods. When we look at the Odysseus story, or Odysseus is a man, even Gilgamesh, right? He is part divine, but he is human. But there are references to the divine in these stories, and that's really important to the mythical status of these stories, the references that they make to the divine, to the gods. And that ties it into the sort of sacredness of many of these stories and the way in which many of these stories form the basis of religion. Okay, so there's that. We can come back to that. But this is something for you to think about. Like, how would you define myth? Can you give an example of a powerful myth or story that has influenced how you view the world? what are the defining myths or stories of your culture?